we talked about this passage from, I think that's Robert Acosta, at the top, where he describes people in England not using English, okay, because of the advent of Norman. So I think 2.3 is where I said we would pick up. So Anglo-Normans, the language of literature, the upper class, English spoken by peasants. Actually, we did cover all that. We were picking up with 2.1, 2.10, sorry. 14th century. French now studied as a foreign language in England. Why? We talked about that all-important date, which is earlier, that all-important date, 1250, before 1250, and after 1250. Who can tell me briefly what's the significance or what's happening before 1250 in terms of the language? People learning French, if you want, you can say the English, are learning French, borrowing French into English. After 1250, French are learning English and borrowing French into English. So borrowing French into English, that part stays the same. But the significance is that right around the year 1250, we know English now has the upper hand. Okay? Because prior to that, let's call it the English peasantry, if you want, the English peasantry and the middle class, prior to 1250, there's not really a middle class. We'll talk about that in a moment, but it's okay to kind of use this language. Everybody below the aristocracy, let's put it that way. Prior to 1250, everybody below the aristocracy, they're kind of learning some French, how to get along better with the aristocracy, to carry on trade, that kind of stuff. It's not like they're all registering for classes in French, okay? But after 1250, the French are hiring tutors to teach themselves and their children English. Because French is no longer the dominant language. French is no longer the national language, you know, if you want to think of it in those terms. Okay? So English has the upper hand after this period. Okay? So English replaces French as the language of parliament, schools, and the courts. And I think somewhere in here, I've got, it's either in here or in another set of notes, I've got some dates of some proclamations and things like that that say, you know, French can no longer be used as the language in Parliament. Late 13th century, I believe. Okay? John of Trevisa's Polychronicon, an example of 14th century, yeah, that's this one, of 14th century English. This is John of Trevisa, who translates Ranulph Higdon's Polychronicon in 1385. Okay. 1385 is about the time Chaucer begins Canterbury Tales. So this is the language about the same time. But bear in mind, we'll talk about this in a moment, there are different dialects. Okay? Chaucer's dialect is not the same dialect as some of the other things we will look at. Chaucer's dialect's pretty easy for a modern English reader. I mean, there's some spelling variations and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, just look at that first sentence. Most of that you can make out, right? First word, as, drop the Y, drop the H, it is known, okay, how many, manner, people, beeth, book in this island. Right? So, as it is known how many people are in this island, there are also of so many people, languages, and tongues. Nonetheless, Welshmen and Scots that are not mixed with other nations holdeth well nigh their first language and speech, but Scots. So, what's he saying? The Welsh and the Scots don't hold their first language, but they speak Scots. Now, I'm not sure what he means by the Scots speaking Scots. That were sometime Confederate and lived with the Picts, won't enough. Old English word totally dies out. Dies out in the Middle English period. They lived with the Picts. They draw somewhat after their speech. Okay, but the Flemish, okay, that live in the west side of Wales. Now, these aren't the Flemish from Flanders. These are some other Flemings that he's talking about. Live in the west side of Wales, have left their strange speak, and they speak Saxon literally, speak like the Saxons now. Also, Englishmen had from their beginning 3 manners of speech. So the English had Southern, Northern, and Middle. What were the dialects of Old English? There was Late West Saxon, or West Saxon if you want, Kentish, Mercian, Northumbrian. 4 dialects. Okay? In the Middle English period, those 4 are going to develop into 5 dialects. Okay? In the middle, then, as they came of 3 manner of people, nonetheless, by, what's that word right there? Commixtion, co-mixing, commingling, okay, and melding together. What happened? First with Danes, Vikings, and afterward with Normans, Norman conquest, okay. In many, the contrary language is appeared, and some use strange, it's essentially waffling, the waffling, okay. Chittering, herring, and gearing, grease beating. He's talking about the sounds, okay. It doesn't sound right, he's saying. This period is the burden, as the birth tongue is because of 2 things. That is, this appearing of the birth tongue. Because of 2 things. One is for children in school, against the usage and manner of all other nations. Okay? So all other nations don't do what the English do. Against the manner, the usage and manner of all other nations, are compelled for to leave their own language and to construe, that is to learn, their lessons and their things in French. So if they go to school, they learn in French. So, quote unquote, lectures, all the teaching done in French. I was just reading an article the other day. There is I think it might be one of the Ivy League schools, has a course in Latin, and the course is entirely done. First day, first minute of the class, entirely in Latin. So if you're a first-year Latin student, you start first day, and you only speak Latin. So if you ask a question of the professor, you've got to formulate it in Latin the first day. Okay? Obviously, students are quiet the first day. Okay? So he goes on. So they learn in French and have, since the Normans come first into England. That is, ever since the Normans arrived, the English have been taught French in school and such. Notice, this is against all other custom and usage of other nations. Why? Because when you're in France, what are you taught?
French.
Growing up? French. If you're in Germany, you learn German. If you're in China, you learn Chinese. If you're in, I almost channeled Obama there and said if you're in Austria, you learn Austrian. No, it's German if you're in wherever you learn that country's language. Okay? So, also, gentlemen. What's he mean by gentlemen? No, aristocracy. Those are the highborn. Gentlemen children are, I have no idea what that word is. I don't think I've ever seen that word before. Are taught, R-E taught. That's what that is. For to speak French from time that he be, what? Rocked in their cradles. So, gentle-born children, aristocratic children, are taught French from when they're rocking in their cradle. Okay? And Conniff learn to speak and play with the child his approach, probably, and uplandish men will liken himself to gentlemen and found with great business for to speak French, for to be, and then he goes on, right? So, as with the Robert of Gloucester Chronicle, what's he talking about?
How, like the ruling classes in England at the time spoke French, and that was, like, the language of, like, politics and stuff.
And he's saying that this is ultimately what? This is against all other customs of other nations, okay? And I think both writers are essentially suggesting what? It won't last. It won't last. Now, this is a translation in 1385 of a chronicle. And I don't remember, and I don't think I have the date for when Higden's Chronicle is written. If I could have found that other book I was looking for, it would have that. The book I was looking for in my office is, it's part of another History of the English Language text that comes in 3 volumes. And it's a listing of words borrowed into the English language from about beginning around 700. So you start to see some Norse words brought in around 700. Whole bunch of Latin words and such, okay? So this is Trevise's translation, 1385. Let's move that back over here. So that's an example of 14th century Middle English that's not quite Chaucer's, but it's close. Okay? Henry V, first English king, Plantagenet I should say, first Plantagenet king to grow up speaking English and reading and writing in English. Okay? Henry IV learned English. We went back the other day and talked about Edward II learned English long before the 2 Henrys. Okay, but Henry V, he doesn't become king until what, 1413, something like that. He doesn't become king until then. He's the first of those Plantagenets to learn English growing up. Because what are the others? According to John of Trevise's translation, what did he just say? The gentle people, well,
like from birth.
The royal family, you don't get more gentle than that. You don't get higher aristocratically than that. They're all speaking French from birth. Okay? So, Henry V grows up speaking English. Could be, not saying it is, could be one of the reasons why he's one of the most well-loved of all English kings. Could also be a little bit have to do with Shakespeare's portrayal of him in the eponymous play. So, other reasons for the reemergence of Middle English, or English if you want, over French. 213.1. English is the language of the rising merchant class. What do we mean by merchant class? Traders, people who own business. What would that be today? And by the way, when we talk about class, where does that language come from? That does not come from Middle English, doesn't come from the Renaissance. It's entirely Marxian. It's entirely Marxist. Nobody prior to Marx talked about the middle class. They talked about, differing levels of society, but it wasn't class. In the Middle Ages, what they talked about were the three estates, okay, which we'll talk about in a moment. So, who's the rising merchant class? Well, they are because of the next thing. That is, you don't have the rising merchant class without the Black Death. Okay? What's Black Death? Bubonic plague. Okay? Where did it come from? Asia. Not necessarily China, Asia, but if you think of the Asian continent, which goes all the way from where? China to, a little bit west of that, Turkey is often considered part of the Asian continent because it's where? It's at the border of Europe and Asia. Okay, so the Black Death came how? We think it came from rats on trading ships. It's not the rats themselves that carry bubonic plague. It's the fleas on the rats that carry bubonic plague. Okay, So what's going on between ports in the east and ports in the west? Well, trade partially. What else? What else begins around, what year is the first one? Sometime in the early 11th century. The Crusades begin. The Crusades don't occur by Western Christians marching across Europe to get to Palestine. Some of them do march, but most of them take ships. Okay? They take boats, they fight, they do their killing, they get back on the boats, and they come back. Well, when they get back on the boats and come back, rats come with them, and probably some of those soldiers who are returning are already infected. Okay? Beginning in the 11th century. I mean, the Black Death isn't only 13th century and later. There are sporadic outbreaks, okay? But primarily, late 13th and 14th century is when it's really bad. How really bad? The general estimate that's usually given is that 1/3 of the population of Europe dies during successive waves, okay, of the Black Death in the 14th century. So, we can't really wrap our minds around that. So take, what's the population of Murfreesboro? It's about 130, 140,000. So take 43,000. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Take from Lavandria and everybody over, you're dead. Excuse me. You live. You 5 are dead. 1/3. All right. So what happened? If you've seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail, you know about the Black Death. So what happens with the Black Death? How's it spread? That's how. That's how. Okay? Bodily fluids, etc. So, where does it hit the hardest? Louder? Cities. Populated, congested areas. Why? Medieval cities, like modern European cities today, are not like American cities. Well, wow, there's a loaded Amerocentric statement. It's not that they're not clean, but American cities tend to grow how? Out. They spread out. I live in, quote unquote, in Murfreesboro, but I'm 9 miles away from here. From right here. Okay? If you go to London and you go to Buckingham Palace, which, in one sense, it's like the epicenter of London. Or if you go to the Tower of London, which is about 3 miles away, okay, and go 9 miles away, you're outside London proper. Okay? You are still in the environs of London, okay? But London and most European cities are built how? They're built up. Middle Ages, same way. And you can go to some places in both London and other towns in England and see this today. Okay? You can wander down these little narrow roads. And when I say little narrow roads, I mean there are literally lanes in London that are curb and sidewalk right here, curb and sidewalk right here. Okay, this is like 1 car width. Okay, why? Because they didn't have cars, obviously, when these lanes were built. They had carriages. Carriages are a lot narrower, and 2 could fit side by side. Okay, but how are they built? They're built up, so that in the Middle Ages you would have a street like this, and now look at it looking down the street from the top. Here's a building. What do you do with the next building? It overhangs slightly, okay? And they keep going and overhanging slightly. Why? Because down the middle of the street, you have a gutter, okay? And these people, here's a window, take their bed pot in the morning and throw it out in the street. And these people take their bed pot in the morning and throw it out in the street. Notice, it doesn't land on the people below. It doesn't land in so that you can go to some places in England and walk down some of these little narrow alleys. It's where J.K. Rowling gets the idea of Diagon Alley being all kind of convoluted and everything. And look up and see, almost literally here, the only amount of space between the building on this side and the building on this side is like one of these squares. Because they just keep building out like that. Okay? So, you're that congested, and it just spreads. So, most of the deaths from the Black Death are in the cities. So, most of the economy, such as it is, in the city, what happens to it as a result of the Black Death? Comes to a screeching halt, right? Well, what happens when you can't go to your favorite pub and get beer? Or you can't go to your favorite bakery and get bread? Louder? You go to another one. But what if they're all dead?
Then you leave.
You leave? You take it over, or if you're out in the country and you hear what's happening, okay, most quote-unquote sane people would say, I'm not going there. There's illness and plague and pestilence. But some said, this is my way to, channel William Thatcher, change my stars. In other words, this is a means of changing what? Your family history. Not your previous family history, your future family history. You can go from being a peasant, tied to the ground, to a merchant. Going into town and becoming an apprentice. As a blacksmith, as a wheelwright, as a cooper, etc., etc. As a baker, as a tapster. That's the rising merchant class. Well, why else do you have a rising merchant class? That's part of it. Well, the aristocracy has needs. The aristocracy, right? Everybody in here's a good Marxist. They're not going to work for it. They're not going to do the stuff on their own. What do they need? They need help. They need people to provide the things they want. So, again, partly because of the Black Death, people move in from the countryside and provide those services, is what we call them today. Okay? So, labor is a valuable commodity. When your workers keep dying, what else happens? What happens when we have a really, really strong labor market in the United States? Like we do actually right now. Just the other. Wages go up. Why? It's more competitive. If you don't have enough workers to fill the jobs, what do you have to do? You raise the wages so that, if I want W to come work for me, I raise my wages. I mean, my son, he's 17 years old, he's talking about getting a job. He just finished a place and now he has time. And he's thinking, where do I want to go to work? I don't want to go work for, Publix, because they only pay $8.50 an hour. Walmart's like $11.50 an hour. And I'm like, yeah, but it's Walmart. Do you really want to, what about you can go to work? Because he's looking at it now, I can get a job almost anywhere. So he's just kind of, which one? Greedy little bastard, right? Which one's going to pay me the most? Okay. So, Peasants' Revolt, 1381, increases the power of the lower classes. What's the Peasants' Revolt? It's exactly what it sounds like. The Peasants' Revolt. They go on strike, essentially. What is one of the things they want? Higher wages, better living conditions. Okay? What happens to the peasants when they revolt? This is under Richard II, by the way. Wat Tyler is the leader. Richard kind of, verbally says, I will agree to your demands. The peasants march on London, essentially. And if I remember correctly, brain's a little addled this morning, they're killed. Those who march are actually killed. But their point got across, okay? And the conditions do change somewhat for the peasants after the revolt of 1381, okay? What's another reason for the reemergence of Middle English over French? Well, poets, for one thing, writers, are writing some pretty good, important literature in English. Chaucer, Langland, who's, Piers Plowman is the title of the poem. Pearl poet, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, okay? They use English. Vernacular languages also gaining respectability on the continent. Now, Chaucer begins writing his poetry in about 1375, okay? Dante's over 100 years before that. Dante is the first Italian poet to write in native vernacular Florence Italian. Okay? Now, we've had people writing in native vernacular English, Middle English before this. Not all the romances date from the late 14th century. Some of them are much earlier. I've got a book in here that I used when I taught English at the graduate level. And one of the really nice things about this text is, it arranges things both by genre and chronologically. So, for example, Marie de France writes L'Envol in about 1175. Okay. The only problem is L'Envol's not in Middle English. L'Envol's in Breton. It's a Breton lay. Okay. Romance. King Horn, Havelock the Dane. Remember 1250? King Horn's from right around that period. Havelock the Dane, 1285. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, that's like Chaucer's day. Sometime around 1375 to 1400. What else? In the fabliau genre, Dame Sirith, which is it's kind of a parody. It's from around 1300. So it's before this, but it's after 1250. This book does not include hardly anything prior to 1250. What it does include are Lyman from the Brute, 1189 to 1205, which is not intelligible to a modern English audience. like Chaucer is. Why? Because it's from a northern dialect. Much like if any one of you were to go to Glasgow today, Glasgow, Scotland, get off the train and just go up to a native Glaswegian and speak to that person, you'd probably go, I know this is supposed to be English, but I didn't get what you just slow it down, first of all. And once they slowed it down, you'd start to understand. But they would use an awful lot of terms you would be totally ignorant of, okay? Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain, that's written in Latin primarily. Most of this, as I said, is after 1250. He doesn't have in here, I don't think, Orm's Ormulum, which is 30,000 lines. Beowulf's only 3,200. So 10 times that length in boring didactic prose. I mean, it's just like all one big long sermon. Okay? Really, really boring stuff. So authors like these, however, they make the language sexy, so to speak. Yes, Rebecca.
What was the literacy rate back then? Who could read?
Very low. I don't know off the top of my head the actual rate. Because one reason, they don't have what we consider to be public schools. Or even, what the British consider to be private schools, which are our public schools. It's the other way around over there. Okay? They didn't have those. Those don't start until early Renaissance. Okay? So who gets educated?
The wealthy.
The gentles, the upper class. Why? They can afford tutors. Okay, so where do the tutors come from? Tutors. T-U-T-O-R-S, not two doors like Henry VII and such. Clergy, some. Who else? What begins in the 12th century? Anybody know? Both in Europe and in England. The rise of the universities. Oxford, I want to say around sometime 1150, 1180. Cambridge, I believe, is within about 50 years of that. Okay. So what's the purpose of the universities?
To teach people to be legislators.
Yeah, it's more that. It's actually to teach people to become clergy. Okay. So, but as a result of that, it's also to teach those who are going to become. What fills the government today? Bureaucrats. Secondary level what? Paper pushers. It's to fill the rising government. What happens as a result of 1215? Magna Carta, right? What is one of the things that Magna Carta stipulates? Every year, the king and the barons must do what? They have to hold parliament. So what happens once parliament starts to become more regular? Well, you have to have clerks, right? Because you have to have people who can write down the acts, etc. of parliament. With clerks come secretaries. Not secretaries like we think of, but secretaries who actually, not keep schedules and such, but who are responsible for filing papers, etc. So you start to see this kind of agglomeration of bureaucratic control and such. Well, the universities feed that. Yes, what Tess said is correct too. The universities do produce teachers for other universities, but they also produce tutors, people who have been trained largely for the clergy or for politics or the judiciary, okay, who decide, they're not cut out to be a priest, or they're not cut out for legislative stuff. And so instead, they hire themselves out as tutors. You used to be able to walk around Peck Hall, and just about every bulletin board, you'd see a sheet of paper with these little strips sticking off the end with telephone numbers. And on the top, it would have in big letter, tutoring available. Pull off one of the strips with a phone number, give the person a call, and they'd be willing to tutor you for writing your English paper, or maybe it would be pay me a certain amount and I'll write your English paper, that kind of thing. Okay? So you have the universities begin, 12th century, okay? So that causes a slight uptick in literacy. But what do you still not have? Even 1400. Access to these. Because where are these? First of all, there aren't any of these. Because this is a printed book. 1400, there aren't any printed books. Okay? You have manuscripts, and they are where? Largely in monasteries, or cathedral libraries, or the universities. That's it. You don't have, a local lending library. You don't have a public library of sorts. So that when Chaucer describes his clerk of Oxenford, who has at the head of his bed 20 volumes. Okay? This guy's a student still. He has 20 volumes. That means he has 20 manuscript books. In his day, 1385 or so, what does that 20 volumes represent in our day? It would be like the entire holdings of Walker Library. I mean, it would be huge for a poor student to have that many books. Well, why is he poor? It's not because he's a student. He's poor because he spends all his money on acquiring those books. That's why he has threadbare clothes, we are told. Why? It takes a lot of money to produce a medieval manuscript. First of all, it takes a lot of cows just to get the hides. And then you have to pay a monk or a priest or a scholar to copy the book you want. That means that person has to have access to the book you want. Okay? So it's very time intensive. But shortly after this period, 1450, 1455, a guy in Germany does what? He invents the movable printing press for Western Europe. China had a printing press much, much earlier, but it was block printing. It was a little bit different. But they'd had that since about 900. Okay? But the movable printing press, with that, back to Rebecca's question, literacy skyrockets. Why? I printed 20 of these out this morning for my next class. 600 years ago, 600 years ago, I couldn't have printed those out. These are 31 rules of courtly love. I would have had to handwrite every one of these to give to my students. Guess what? Wouldn't have happened. Okay? With the rise of the printing press, I could set all the type, ink the type, put a piece of paper in, 1, re-ink it, 2. And guess what? In about an hour, I could produce all these. Or in a couple days, I could produce a book. Or multiple books. Okay? Multiple books produces what? It's good business. The creator, Gutenberg, just did what? He created this. What do I mean? This is a phone, by the way. It's an iPhone. Go back before the iPhone and there was what? Not that kind of phone. What do most people use their iPhones or whatever phones today for? Do they use them to call? No. A lot of people use them for what? The internet? Music. Okay. Jobs, before he created the iPhone, he created what? The iPod. A portable music delivery device. Those of us who are old enough remember the 70s. It was called the Sony Walkman, where you're carrying a cassette player and you put the, okay. Before that, what did you have? The boombox, where you're walking around with a box and you're putting it on your shoulders. And before that, what did you have? 1960s, transistor radio. Before that, what did you have? Nothing. In terms of being able to carry it unless you had your own voice. You didn't have any means of carrying music around with you. So each one of those inventions did what? Created a market. The invention of the printing press created a market for what? Literacy books. Hey, they're out there. I want to know what to do with this. You know, I think I told the story here of Alfred the Great. If I didn't, I should have. Alfred the Great was given a challenge by his mother. In fact, he and his brothers were given this challenge. She had this little book of Anglo-Saxon poetry, okay, written in Old English, and it was these poems of Anglo-Saxon. She said, the first one of you who learns to read Old English or learns to read this, you can have this little book. Well, Alfred had a tutor who was a bishop, well learned, and Alfred cheated, according to this bishop who wrote the life of Alfred. It's Asser, by the way, if you've watched the Netflix Old English, the Bernard Cornwell series. Alfred memorized the poems that were on the pages. He did not learn a lick of writing. He just knew what, when it appeared on a page, what it looked like. Well, give a 5-year-old today Goodnight Moon, and that 5-year-old would do the exact same thing. You can turn to the third board and point to it, and that child will tell you exactly what it says on that page. Not because that child is, or a 3-year-old, not because that child has necessarily learned how to read, but they know what sounds, words, go with what images. Okay? Back to here. So, Anglo-Norman. Why are we going back to Anglo-Norman? That's the language of the Normans, right? Yes, it is. So, Anglo-Norman. Great literature, a lot of Arthurian stuff. It's Anglo-Norman. It's not Middle English. You have to learn Anglo-Norman in order to read this. Okay? It's kind of before the real rise and flowering of Middle English literature. 12th century, early 13th century. So late 1100s, early 1200s. It gradually declines because of the prestige and dominance of Parisian French. Chaucer makes a joke about this. Okay? In his general prologue, he talks about the nun's prioress, Madame Eglantine. And she speaks what kind of French? She doesn't speak Parisian French. She speaks the French of Stratford at Bow. Stratford at Bow is a town in England. What does that mean? Well, extrapolate it to today. She speaks English like they do in Woodbury, French. So she doesn't say parlez-vous français. She says parlez-vous français? Oh, yeah. That's not quite right. Why? Because that's how French is taught at Stratford at Bow. What does that automatically tell us? At the time Chaucer is writing that, French is what? It is totally a foreign language. Totally foreign. Okay? Chaucer is taught French because we know Chaucer knew French because he wrote in French. Some of his poetry is in French. He also knew Latin because he writes in Latin. Okay? And he obviously knows English. So, here are some differences between Anglo-Norman pronunciations and Parisian French pronunciations. Right? So, where Anglo-Norman has a k sound, Parisian French has a sh sound. Cart. Cart. Parisian French, charrette. Shh. Okay? I don't use it up here. Good. So, Anglo-Norman, this is where it comes from. Cavalry, not Calvary, cavalry. Calvary's, the mountain across Jesus and everything. Cavalry. What would the Parisian French begin with? And from the rest, chevalier, I think. Or, what word do we get from that? Chivalry. By the way, this and this are related to what that you might drive. Chevrolet. You get on your mighty steed and you ride on to church, at school. So, cart, charrette, cattle, chattel, not chattel, but chattel comes from that. Okay? Cauldron, chaudron, okay? Anglo-Norman, what? Spelled with a what? What's that called, by the way? It's a W. Okay? What? Parisian French, get. But it's spelled G-U. Notice. What happens to the U? It's silent. It's silent. Old English, no silent letters. Every letter is pronounced. Okay? So, wa becomes ga. War becomes yeah. Okay? So when you hear people talk about this kind of war, it should be pronounced guerrilla, not guerrilla war. Because guerrillas don't usually go to war against each other. Okay? So, war, guerre, warden. Notice we retain both those words in modern English. But we don't usually talk about the guardian of the state pen. Because that guardian sounds what? Like a parent, benign, loving, benevolent. Most inmates don't talk about the warden as being benign, loving, benevolent. Just watch Cool Hand Luke, one of the greatest films in American history. Okay? Warden, guardian, reward, guerdon. We don't use it anymore. But we do use both of these, a warranty and a guarantee. What's the difference? They're spelled different. They sound different. They mean exactly the same. Which one has more, how do I put this, kind of classy cachet, though? Guarantee. Which one has more classy cachet? Lawyer, attorney. Attorney, it's French. Lawyer, that's native Old English. It's what? It's the law, and then go back to the Greek and Latin suffix that indicates male agent of. Law or. Teach or. The person who does the law. That's all it is. If you wanted to be non-sexist and you were a female lawyer, you'd be a lawyeress. Because the ESS ending is kind of the native feminine ending applied to it. Okay? It's when we take those endings off that we could say language kind of gets sexist. By how people use it. Why? Because those endings drop off. Don't tell me the male time. 8:51. Okay, so Middle English phonology, pretty much the same as Old English. So, GH, letters GH are pronounced you don't have really, I'm trying to think of one, any GH letters in Old English. Why? What letter represents that kind of sound? Like nicht. It's the okay. Old English, that word there for Middle English, the Old English is this. Fuchta, fuchta. It's the letter H. Notice H can have two sounds there, therefore. It can have the kind of sound, the here, or it can have the breathing at the beginning of a word, all right? So, in Middle English, this gets replaced with what? That's why we have so many modern English words that have GH in them, and yet, do we pronounce both letters?
No.
No, we do not. So why do the French do this? Because it sounds kind of a... Does French have that sound? No. It's not tres hures. Trésor. Why? That gets elated. There is no word in French that begins with H where the H is pronounced. It's not hors d'oeuvres. It's what? Purdue. Okay? So, all consonants are pronounced, even those that are silent in modern English. So, go back to this one. The C eventually will get replaced with this. And this is why Monty Python pronounces this as what? Knigget. Notice that. Say it slowly. Knigget. Okay. Now that's an exaggeration of knigget. But there's not that in French. What do they hear? They hear that that horrible sound that they can't make. Okay? What else? Final E, which in Old English, fuchte, it's the as in pet, okay, becomes fuchte. Default sound in the English-speaking mouth. Okay? But eventually, even in the Middle English period, that final E, pronunciation-wise, drops off. And the only reason it's used, for example, probably in Chaucer's poetry, the only reason you pronounce the final E is metrical reasons. Okay? You have to have a certain number of feet, certain number of syllables in a line. What else? That was 4, 5. In verse, pronounce the final E's to make the line stand. By the 14th century, final E was probably silent. That is, in everyday, ordinary usage, people would not probably say winde or winda. They would just say wind. So by Chaucer's day, everyday, ordinary, on the street speech, those E's are all already silent. Okay? That's only 400 years after they're all still pronounced. So, I mean, that's a pretty big change. Okay? Single O is pronounced. So when you see a single O in a word, it's pronounced aw. So the example, how do you pronounce modern English home in Middle English? Hum. Hum. Okay? Double O is pronounced long O. So, B-O-O-T is not boot, boat. OU and OW are pronounced OO. Ooh. So like I did with the Old English, when I put who, nu, brun, ku, now you could do who, nu, brun, ku, or you place the U with the W, it's still pronounced oo. Notice, I said at the beginning, most of the pronunciation is the same as in Old English. What are we talking about? What are the differences so far? Different letters or letter combinations to represent the same sounds. Okay? So, general prologue to the Canterbury Tales. Let me increase it. Okay, so again, most of the phonology stays the same. First line, probably in Chaucer's day, starts with a one. Even though here it's spelled WH. Why is it spelled WH? What does French not have? When they hear Juan, what do they hear? Wa, on. They don't hear, or they can't say the part. So, what do? Transpose those two letters. Reverse the order of them. One that April, with his shures sota, shures sote, the droch, not droch, the drochte of March hath perced tolerota, and by that every vine in sweet liqueur, there's some variation, of which virtue engendred, the G there becomes J, engendred is the fluor, one zephyrus ek, with his sweat the breath, in spirit hath in every halt and heth, tender croppeth on the younger sauna, hath in the ram his halva course irona, and smarter fueles. They're all pronounced fueles, maken melodia, that slepen all the night with open ear. Sa pricketh hem nature in her courages, then, not just then along and folk to gun on pilgrimages. Notice, by the way, that opening 12 lines, essentially, Chaucer, is all what, grammatically speaking? It's one big, long adverbial phrase. It's all telling us what? When. When all this happens, comma, then. When it's, 9:25, then you can go. Okay? So, there's Chaucer. He's in your book. You've got, in your book also, you've got some phonetic transcriptions of Middle English text. Get up there. Okay, shrink this back down. So, internal history now. Influence of French on vocabulary after 1250. We've talked about that. We'll look at some individual words later. Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. I can't remember Sapir's first name. Whorf is Benjamin Lee Whorf, who was an insurance agent, of all things, who wrote linguistics on his side, on his off time. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Anybody know what that is? It's the idea, in a simplified form, that your language determines your perception of reality. I mean, think about that for a moment. What happens if you see something for which you don't have a word for it? Does that mean that thing doesn't exist? You just don't see it? No, it doesn't mean that, but it means what? What can you not do with that thing that you now see for which you don't have any idea or word or descriptor. You can't mentally categorize it. Okay? And the classic example that's given of this, and we know it's now wrong, but it used to be said, Eskimos had, and I don't remember what the number is, something like 70 or 90 different words for snow. Well, it's not word. They don't have that. It's not true. They don't have that many. They do have more than just one word for snow. We, modern English, generally have one word for snow. What if we want to describe different kinds of snow? What must we do? We put an adjective in front, right? It's what kind of snow? It's powder, it's heavy, it's wet, it's thick, it's large, it's small. Okay? But Eskimo does have differing words for those different qualities of snow. Why? Why would Eskimo have that and Tennessee English not?
They got more snow.
They deal with it on a much more regular basis. Tennessee, it's the white stuff that falls from the ground. You get one on the ground and the school's closed. It's not that big a deal. Okay? So, pre-1250 again, English speakers borrow French words, etc. French words for nobility are borrowed during this time. Why? Well, you get all these Frenchies come in, and the English don't have words to describe them. So they have to adopt the words that they bring in. Baron, noble, dame. Oh, the next word, that doesn't describe them, that describes us. Servant. French literary forms come in as a result of the Norman conquest. Like the words story. So what did Anglo-Saxons use for the word story? They didn't use the word poem. Tale, lay, song, yed. The seafarer says, I can recite a true, he says this, okay. Story, rhyme, like our understanding of something rhymes. Ice cream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. Why didn't Old English have that? Their poetry didn't rhyme. It didn't have rhyme to it. Lay, even though I said, we have that, this comes in through Marie de France and the Breton lay, but they had in Old English the lead, okay, which is related to the word for lay. That's the Germanic form. Adventure. Notice you can just look at that and see where it ultimately comes from. It comes from Latin. It's got that ad prefix. Okay. Romance, all from French. So post 1250, French speakers borrowing French words into English as they learn English. Borrowings from Latin also during this period, right? We saw 3 periods of borrowing of Latin in the Old English section. So now we have more borrowings from Latin. Why? If you're a scholar in England and you want to communicate with a scholar in Germany, you don't write in English. Why? Because they might not know it. What do? You use the lingua franca. Okay? The universal language. That's Latin. What's the universal language today?
English.
It's English. If you want to become a commercial pilot and you want to fly jumbo jets, not the Boeings that are grounded, but a 747 or 757 or something like that, you have to speak English. Why? Every control tower in the world uses English. Every one. So if you're flying from Atlanta to Nairobi, Kenya, when they're on their approach to Nairobi, it's all in English. Okay? So Latin is the universal language back then. All the way up, really. I mean, sheesh. Through the Renaissance. I mean, when Thomas More writes Utopia, he doesn't write no place. Why? Because no place is what utopia is in English. He writes utopia entirely in Latin. Borrowings from Latin, Dutch. Why? Because the Netherlands are right across the English Channel, and that's England's big commercial ally. But French borrowings predominate. That is, we do have Latin brought in, we do have Dutch brought in, and a whole bunch of others. We got German, we have Spanish, we have Arabic words brought in during this period, but the most are French. Okay? Look at these two statistics. From 1250 to 1400, that's the biggest period of borrowing. Why 1250? Because after that period, French speakers are bringing their native words into. So, during the Middle English period, over 10,000 words are brought into French, are brought from French into English. So 10,000 French words are adopted into the English language. We use 3/4 of those still today. Now, if those words are brought in, why do you think they're brought in? Why do you adopt a word? To fill a gap. They don't have a word for it. So it's perceived there's this 10,000 word gap in the native Old English, Middle English vocabulary. Like what? Attorney. But there's not a gap, right? Because there's lawyer. Like scarlet and vermilion. But there's not a gap, right? Because there's, in Old English, red.
Okay, but scarlet's not the same thing as red.
Is scarlet, are scarlet and vermilion not the same as red? Well, if you're partially colorblind like I am, red's red. Everything else is just a shade. It's just a different shade or hue of red. Okay? So, as a result of this, you get this. Okay? Remember that we talked about that Old English means of, you just take one word and slap it next to another one. Beowulf is full of words that the Beowulf poet is the only one to use. Because those words, in terms of the entire Old English poetic corpus, those words only show up in Beowulf. Guess what? Shakespeare does the exact same thing. Shakespeare's is the first known use of over 1,700 words in his vocabulary. Now, what most of us think that actually means is Shakespeare creates 1,700 words in his vocabulary, which is about 1/8 of his vocabulary Shakespeare creates. Well, I mean, if you're Shakespeare, who's going to tell you no? Don't try that on your paper. Or if you do, just put in parentheses what you mean. Or a footnote. Footnote's better. It looks scholarly. Okay? So, Old English prefixes that begin, for example, for, to, with, get replaced by the less flexible, because each of these has different meanings, by the less flexible Latin and French prefixes. Re, pre, anti, contra. Anti always and only means what? Against. Contra never means with. It's always against. Okay? Diminishing of Old English suffixes like dome, hood, ship. Give me a word that ends with dome.
Kingdom.
What? And give me another one. Freedom. Two. Come on. Two. Yeah, you can't think of many. What about hood? Neighborhood. Fatherhood, sisterhood, brotherhood, motherhood. Do we say unclehood? Niecehood? No. Okay. Ship. Friendship. Relationship. Leadership. Fellowship. Courtship for you old-fashioned people. Not a whole lot more. Okay. These are rarely used, and they're not used today. in creating new words. Latin French suffixes like tion, or, meaning, go back to the original Latin, one who does something, male one who does something, e, one who has it done too, teacher, you are my teachees. I hate it when people do this. Like, you're going to be assigned to be a mentor and this person will be your mentee. Yeah, no, it's an ugly word, okay? Okay. Are used more often. New words were borrowed. That is, rather than make a word, hey, here's a good word over here. Let's just borrow it lock, stock, and barrel. So, loss of Old English genius for creating self-explanatory compounds. So, rather than have that ability to create new words, what? I mean, one of the big buzz things, among social justice warriors and all that today is what? Cultural appropriation. What have we been talking about all semester? Language is culturally appropriate. How? They take from the defeated. You borrow words that you need, you want, and you get rid of those that you don't want. Okay? It's all cultural appropriation. By the way, if you haven't seen it, I think I posted an article about DNA and genetics for the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, and Portugal that shows about 2500 BC, the original population of Spain and Portugal was pretty much replaced with the population of people from where? Ultimately, the steppes of southern Russia. Those are the Indo-Europeans. So, 2500 BC, whoever lived in Spain and Portugal before then, they get replaced by the Indo-Europeans, with one exception in terms of the people replaced. The Basques. Apparently, the Basques are so bad, you know what, that you just leave them alone. And they still are. Okay, spelling innovations. What time is it? Oh, shut up, Siri. Time, 9:14. Siri can be very useful, but she can also be a pain in the ass. So, spelling innovation. So you have the pronunciation over here. Hopefully this is the right set of notes and everything shows up right. Yeah, for the most part. You have the Old English spelling for that pronunciation. You have the Middle English spelling. Notice the pronunciation doesn't change. The pronunciation stays the same. It's the spelling that changes to accommodate the pronunciation because of the influence of French. This is why I go back to first day of class, and pretty much all my subsequent classes, what do I often say about French and the English language? It screws it up. It's why today spelling makes no sense. Okay? So, Old English spelling of a word with that pronunciation, and it's Middle English spelling of the same pronunciation. So, the spelling or the pronunciation, spelled just with a C, Middle English spelling, it's got what sound in it? French doesn't like that, so they got to throw something in there. So Old English, chiriche. Middle English, church. Northern Middle English, we'll talk about a little bit later, kirk. Why? Because the ch gets replaced by Viking. Okay. Actually, we talked about that earlier. So, pronunciation, Old English spelling with an H. Middle English spelling, 3 different forms. Retains the H in some areas. It gets replaced by GH in others, and then they go and introduce a different letter form. It's actually a letter form that we have in Old English that's not used much. Okay? This is called a yo. Y-O-G-H. Yo. Yo. Okay? It looks kind of like a 3. Not superimposed. Reduced, shrunk, downward. So, Old English example, licht, licht. Or sometimes it's spelled lecht, L-E-O-H-T. Okay? Notice, 3 different spellings. L-I-H-T, L-I-T, L-I-G-H-T. But they're all pronounced how? Like the Old English. Okay? Huh. Spelling H-W, Middle English spelling W-H, Old English example while, Middle English example voila. Okay? Qua, Old English spelling C-W, Middle English Q-U, but it's still pronounced qua. Old English quiche, quene, quick. The CK here comes from Viking, okay, and then Queen. J, CG, Middle English gets replaced with two G's or DG. Why? What's this sound like at the very beginning? What do you start to do? Duh. Another, I don't think I sent this article. Another article recently, just announced a couple days ago, shows where we get those labial dental fricatives from. V and f. What do you have to do to make that sound? V. Notice teeth with upper lip, v, and f. They think the development of those sounds came from a change in diet. And the change in diet caused lower jaw to retract a little bit. Okay? Why would you do that? Because we went from eating softer food to harder food. Because with harder food, you got to be able to grind. Okay? I think the guys who did the study say that occurred around 10,000 BC. Okay? Physiological change began. So, GG, Old English, bridge, or RICG, ridge, becomes, same pronunciation, bridge, okay? Sh, spelled SC, SS, SCH, SH, fish. So, it's not fis, it's fish. Pronunciation either f or th. Okay? Thorn or ev just get replaced with f. So, modern English how do you know which one to use? Pronunciation-wise. Why isn't this fine? Why does it become thine? And this is thin. Why isn't this then? Well, because we say, no, well, that's because that's then. Yeah, why? Because they idiot French. So, thorn, this is really important. Thorn remains in archaic spellings. Ye old shop is from, not ye, they, old shopper. So when you see a sign today, you go someplace, and it says, ye old shop, you can go in and say, your sign doesn't make any sense, because what does that really say? You old shop? You old shop, you. W, Old English letter, is called when, and it looks kind of like a P, but it's more like that, okay? Old English, with, gets replaced with a W. Sound, Old English, C. Middle English gets replaced by a K and or C. King, kin. Time, 9:21. A few more spelling changes. Represented by an S, Middle English gets represented by an S, or a stupid French C. So Old English sender gives you sendra, sender, different spelling obviously. In modern English, center. So you can go to Central Middle School or Central High School, Central Magnet School, but you can go to Center Point Square. Notice the difference there. That's modern. That's entirely modern. Why? Because that's trying to look fancy. It's trying to look Englishy. Why does English have C-E-N-T-R-E and American English have C-E-N-T-E-R? Because of a 19th century American who you're all familiar with. Noah Webster, who changes our spelling patterns. He doesn't change them as much as he wants to, because he really wants to change it. But he does get some accepted. Okay? Good. With Old English, yo gets replaced with a G. Old English, good, good. And then, yeah. Old English, yo. Notice the yo can represent both g and ya. Okay? It gets replaced with what? Either the same, stays yo, or a y. And it's from that we get Old English yar, like in Beowulf, yar dagum, days of yore, and we get modern English Y-E-A-R. Okay? A couple more minutes. We can do one of these. So, some sound changes. Now, we've said most of the sounds stay the same. Okay? Here are some sound changes. They're not really changes per se. They're more droppings of sounds. So, consonants. Simplification of Old English consonant clusters. What do we mean? Well, look at just those three. And those are the three major ones that are used. Where Old English has a hn, hru, okay, you get the H drop off. Why? Because French doesn't begin any words with So, the examples are Old English Knutu becomes, what do you drop? You drop this also, because this is part of the leveling of inflections. What word do we get from that? Nut. Okay. What's the next one? H. That's HN. Old English, hlaf becomes lof. Great vowel shift kicks in, and this becomes loaf. Old English, hlaford, H-L-A-F-O-R-D, is the word from which we get Lord. Who's the Lord? I don't mean that one. I mean, you're coming every day around the middle of the Lord. The person in charge of the bread. Person who feeds you. Right? Whether in your own little domestic house or, the big house, so to speak. H-R Prod, I think, which gives us road. Loss of CH endings. This is really important. In unstressed syllables. Well, where are those unstressed syllables usually? The very ends of words. How many of you pronounce your I-N-G? I'm going to the store. If you do, it's probably because you had a grade school teacher beat that into you. We tend to drop those. Okay? So, lich becomes ich becomes e. And lich becomes li. All right, we will stop there and pick up with the rest on Thursday. I don't know if we'll finish on Thursday the Middle English portion or not.